What is the price of freedom in South Africa? For many South Africans, that price has been measured in terms of detention, banning, day-to-day harassment, and even death. Those actively opposing the oppressive system of apartheid have realized this is the price they must pay. One of those people was David Webster. It was said of Webster that he was a true son of the African soil. His body returned to that soil, but where is his spirit? Perhaps if we find that spirit, we can touch the new South Africa for which Webster lived and died. On the 1st of May, 1989, David Webster was gunned down outside his home in the old Johannesburg suburb of Trooival.
Do you know who David Webster was?
Yes. Some politician who makes up nonsense, I don't know.
You don't know much about it?
No, I haven't followed it. That doesn't interfere very much.
Oh, I don't know.
I'm a musician. I've got no idea.
Of course, he was murdered, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think it was sort of government force behind it.
Well, every country's got its force.
So you think it's okay?
Yeah, it's true.
Living in Trooival appeals to Webster for a number of reasons. Among them, the fact that it is a so-called grey area where official racial barriers have broken down. Trooival is also one of Johannesburg's oldest suburbs, which appeals to his interest in history.
We actually moved into Trooival into another house, and this particular house we used to walk past, and in fact we used to look at houses to choose the house we would like to live in, and this is the one that David really wanted. And by chance it came up for sale.
And then you actually tried to find out more about it.
He went into the municipal offices and found out who had lived here. Who had happened to be a pharmacist. In 1905, at least, it was a pharmacist. Though we know it was built before then, we think 1902.
Trooival was also at one time the home of another well-known figure in South African history, Mahatma Gandhi. From here, Gandhi waged his peaceful struggle against apartheid. Just a few blocks away, but several decades later, David Webster engaged in the struggle to bring to an end that same apartheid system. Like Gandhi, Webster used peaceful methods to fight apartheid, although he was not an absolute pacifist. But he took the struggle into every area of his life, a life which spanned an extraordinary spectrum of activities.
David was a remarkable man, and I would say that the one quality which he had, which stands out above all others, and I think is really the key to the man, is that his love of people. Whatever he did related to people, whatever he enjoyed related to people. You know, his love of township music, his love of soccer, obviously his intense interest in politics, and so on. His love of social anthropology. It all revolved around people. He was a man of the people.
Webster's concern with people led him to an active involvement with others in all areas of his life. This included the Orlando Pirates Soccer Club. In addition to planning a book on the club's history, he was also an active member and supporter.
When Dave registered as a member of Pirates, at that point in time we were sort of in the, not a promising I would say situation, because we had the then NPSL splitting into NSL and NPSL, and we had many of the most professional teams, good teams, splitting as well into two. And Orlando Pirates was one of them. So we had some players going for the one section, the other players going for the other section. And as we were now trying to get good players to come and play for us, Dave was one of the most influential characters that helped in organizing and recruiting for new players. Like I can call Dan Malitela now, who is the captain at Pirates. We were recruiting him with Dave's help at that time.
Even music drew Webster into an active involvement. At first, this involvement took the form of aiding a township jazz band, the African Jazz Pioneers.
How did you come to meet David Webster?
Yeah, well, that well, I don't remember, but between 83, 84, wish that well, he said to us one day, well, okay, I can see we are neglected because we are all musicians, everybody, he doesn't care for you. So that, well, I'll try a means to get a verse. Well, unfortunately, get us a verse there. We played there. All that money which was made there, he gave us to us to get the transport, to get some instrument, and it's a broken instrument, to keep on. To my surprise, to that, small children, 19, 20 years, they become very excited about this music.
He'd go and watch someone playing music and he'd be at work the next day. Oh, have you heard this person? You have to come and see them. Or just before he died, it was Michel Schacht, the singer. I've forgotten the name of that song. Anchored Down in Anchorage, that's right. He was crazy about it, and wherever he'd go, he'd say, oh, have you heard this song? He was somebody who really wanted to share the best of things with the people around him.
That was what David was. He always wanted to do the best for everybody, not just for me, but for anybody. He wanted to make it easier for them, to ease their pain, and he did.
Helen Joseph was an old friend of Webster's. Although they shared political views and platforms, it was their mutual love of animals that brought them together. And when Helen's dog died, David was there to care for her.
As soon as I came back, David came round and said, now I'm going to get a dog. I'm going down to SPCA, I'm coming back with a dog. And he went and fetched her, and he brought her, and this dog I have now, this fat old Labrador. But I want to tell you why he chose the dog, because that's so like David. All the other dogs were scrambling at the wire netting, saying to people, please take me, but not Abby. Abby had been through a bad time. She had puppies, and the puppies had been sold, but nobody wanted Abby. And she was on her last week. She was on her way to the gas chamber. And Jessie was sitting at the back of the run, with her head down, her paws down, and David said, I'm taking that one for Helen. And I think he said to him at the SPCA, you're mad, she may not like her. She'll love her.
Well, he was a caring person, and he really showed it in all aspects of his life, as a teacher, and as an anthropologist, and as a friend.
If you look at his work, for example, in Cozy Bay, which is where he was doing his field work at the time that he died, it wasn't enough for him just to do the field work, to get the material to write the very interesting articles he was writing at the time that he died. But he also engaged with the needs and the problems of the people, part in very practical ways. So, for example, to go and get their pension payouts, old people had to walk miles and miles and miles, and so David would take them. And then, also in broader ways, the people were facing a threat of removal because a game reserve is going to be set up in the area where they live. And he helped with them to campaign to stop that.
Webster's work as an anthropologist at Wits University was an expression of his tremendous interest in human society. It was an interest which for him inevitably involved a concern for the people whose societies he studied. This concern became evident in his early studies of the Chopi people in Mozambique.
He became very interested in the relationship between the small-scale society and the larger economic and political structures, and he started working, particularly became interested in the issue of migrant labour, which was a major concern of radical historiography and radical social science generally at that time.
So what was the significance of migrant labour for David?
It was such an important feature of the daily life of the villages he was studying in southern Mozambique. And it was such a kind of disfiguring thing as well. It had a very destructive impact. And he was aware of that in his academic work, but he didn't really have the sort of framework with which to understand it more broadly.
Webster was born on a Zambian copper mine. These mining routes gave him an interest in both the working class and in mining history, elements that combined in his later life with his concern with migrant labour and its destructive side effects. In the late 70s, Webster lived in an old mining village, Crown Mines. A new community flourished here. Artists, students, academics and trade unionists, black and white, built their own small island of harmony in the apartheid sea. While his academic studies delved into the ills attendant on migrant labour, like malnutrition, tuberculosis and black poverty, he also began an active involvement in attempting to find political solutions to these problems.
Just before we went to live in Crown Mines, we'd been over to England on David's sabbatical, and we'd come across South African exiles. We'd come across movements that we had never been in contact with before, and we heard about things that really extended our experience very much wider. And we came back to find a lot of South Africans. It was post-Soweto, and a lot of our friends had become involved in the labour movement, and one wanted actually to become involved. One wanted to identify oneself more strongly with that side.
One of David Webster's students at this time often met with a colleague in this Johannesburg park. They always sat on one particular bench here, which was a mistake, because it had been bugged by the security police. The student was a member of the ANC. Her name was Barbara Hogan.
I attended quite a few of the discussion groups he was involved with. And I began to draw him into some of the activities which I was involved in. At that stage, one of the most important activities was setting up an organization of the kind within the White Left. There was this broad spectrum of sort of anti-apartheid activists, but with no real structural organization. And I asked him to be involved in those kinds of activities because firstly, he was older than a lot of the younger activists. And secondly, he just had a lot of dignity and a lot of respect. He commanded a lot of respect. And I think he became interested in it because he was I wasn't the only person doing that. I think David was very, very well connected throughout the whole of South African society, and in Joburg in particular. It wasn't that he was just sitting there on his own and being drawn in by one or two students. He just had a lot of connections, and he knew a lot of what was going on. I think his interest in the kind of activities I was offering him was that it was within the white community. It was in areas that he hadn't been involved with before.
David had an ability to relate to people. He understood the black community. He understood the rural community and the urban community. He understood its nuances. But he also had an empathy with the white community. And that's David the human being as much as David the political animal or the social anthropologist. The ability to bring those two together and to understand the needs of each community and to understand the need for the whites to be aware that to be anti-apartheid is to be pro-South Africa.
Rashid, how did you get to know Dave Webster?
Dave seemed to be very interested in kind of music that was locally based. I mean, he liked bands like Sabenza and Outlaw from Cape Town. I mean, he came to listen to Bombili, and I gathered from seeing him here when I played with Bombili, that he seemed to be only interested in local music, because whenever I played with bands or played music that was more international and non-South African, he didn't seem to be, somehow he wasn't here, you know.
How is he involved with the formation of SAMA?
I mean, I was surprised to see Dave and talking to some of the executive members, and Javin Kwenye, who runs the office, you know, at SAMA. And I suppose then that, I mean, I began to realize that Dave's interest was more than just a listening interest. It was an active interest. I mean, I think Dave would do anything to promote local or anything South African, you know, whether it be political, social, cultural, you know.
Because Webster was an academic, much of his earliest anti-apartheid activity was with students, particularly NUSA.
Dave was one of the most supportive academics on the campuses. He always took a keen interest in what was happening in terms of struggle on the campuses, and he was always there with advice, thoughts, comments, and interest in what was going on.
Right. What was happening in NUSAS at that time?
It was a very exciting time, actually. It was a period where mass organisation was starting to re-emerge at a township level. And while NUSAS had had a fairly long period of quite an introverted, forced introversion, given the repression at a broader level, NUSAS was starting to once again make connections and alliances with broader mass-based organisations. That was a process that had been happening since the early 80s. And Dave was involved in that process and involved in the kind of thought and debate that was happening about the role of students in that context.
He believed that everyone could contribute towards change. My particular way is through cultural interchange, and he believed in peaceful change. And so, you know, he didn't sort of say, oh, well, what you're doing is very small and it doesn't matter. He actually made me feel that our group is doing something which counts.
After his assassination, Sylvia dedicated one of her dance pieces to Webster.
and this is dance synergy, a piece that people can work together in a very celebratory, ritualistic way, that in our society there are elements which can be fused to create something very positive and exciting.
In 1981, a lot of close friends and colleagues, including, Neil Agate, who lived with us in Crown Mines, Barbara Hogan, who was a student of David's, Robert Adam, who worked with me, people we knew closely, and, lots of students, the Kachalia brothers, I actually looked to the Colemans, people like that were all detained, and there was a groundswell of people in reaction to that, wanting to do something. And out of these, the detainee support committees were started. And David got involved with the De Beers and the Colemans on the parents' detainee support committee.
In my own case, it was my son who was detained. In the case of David Webster, he had a good friend and one of his pupils, in fact, Barbara Hogan, who was detained.
I think it had a major impact on the community, those series of detentions, and particularly when Neil Agate died in detention. I think it just made people realize, made people make decisions about where they stood and where they wanted to be. And I think David was part of that process, and I think very influential in that whole movement of coming to an awareness of what the arts were in South Africa.
He was mainly dealing with families of detainees, and he used to transport them to various prisons. For instance, in Soweto, he used to transport people to Protea police station, and he used to arrange days because people were being seen on different days. So he was arranging days for them, and he used to borrow the kumbi, the vet's kumbi. So he was taking them with that to and fro, and after that he'll put them in various points where he picked them up. Yeah, he was mainly concerned in the welfare of detainees and the moral support of families.
But some other time, my child was detained. I couldn't find a way east. But one day when I come across Hoto House, I met him. He said, "Yes, Kay, is that you? What's wrong?" I said, "Well, my child, is detained." He said, "Well, let's see." When he tried to phone himself, they denied. They said, "No, the child is not here." David Webster said, "No, man, what are you trying to say? Because I could see the police number. That is the proof the child is there." Then from there, well, the constructor said, "Yes, he's here." From there, I could appreciate his work.
Can you tell us how you came to meet David Webster?
Well, I've met him on campus at this university, just in academic purposes.
Another former student of Webster's is marathon runner Bruce Fordyce, who Webster asked to participate in a campaign to aid detainees, the so-called Running Shoes campaign.
About that campaign?
What it was designed to do was to provide running shoes and running gear for detainees, specifically for detainees, as he explained to me, who were about to be released, and then as they were about to be released, their conditions in detention improved. They got better food, and then suddenly they were allowed to exercise. So they needed the running shoes. And as one friend of mine who was in detention explained to me, one of the things that he missed most of all actually was doing hard physical exercise. He said one of the things he wanted to do most of all was to feel his lungs burning running up a hill. And so that was the one thing, just the practical side of getting shoes to them. But then the second thing, I think, was to try and create an awareness amongst the public, and particularly in the running world, of detainees and their problems.
The apartheid system was like an elephant which could no longer stand the stings of the mosquitoes that plagued it. Apartheid's defenders developed the theory of a communist-inspired total onslaught to justify their total strategy, by which they sought to destroy opponents like the DPSC and other anti-apartheid organizations. In October 1988, a massive explosion wrecked the South African Council of Churches building, Kotso House, where many anti-apartheid organizations, the DPSC among them, had their offices. But although the doors of Kotso House were shut, the DPSC lived on.
What has been the impact of the DPSC subsequent to that?
At the beginning, we were mainly concerned with the welfare aspects, how to get food parcels and change of clothing to the detainees. But we soon came to realize that if we were going to get anywhere, we would really have to tackle the issue of detention without trial itself. And once you're pointed in that direction, then obviously you're led to the issue of apartheid, which really has to be defended by the state. One can say that the fact that we were restricted last year, the organization was restricted from undertaking any activity whatsoever, is a measure of our success. If you like, the government has given us our diploma.
Among the activities organized by the DPSC were the so-called detainees tea parties. Webster was one of those responsible for organizing these tea parties, an activity which the state security forces regarded with the deepest distrust.
The tea parties were in a form of trying to share problems with the families of detainees, and also trying to give them moral support. And also they were trying to educate our community, because what has happened is that most people didn't actually know what it really meant by detention, you know, what is happening when we are saying a person is being detained. So they were in a form of education forum, you know.
They saw behind the tea parties much more. You know, they realized that in those tea parties friendships were formed, trust was established, a mutual relationship of understanding was created, and that could become the danger, and that he would possibly use that as the basis for extending the influence of his thoughts and his concerns and his vision of a new South Africa.
So why do you think he was killed?
I don't know. I don't know, it's a very difficult question. You know, you go round and round and nothing really makes much sense. I did think at first that it must be something that arose from the detainees' tea parties, because that's where he had a particularly high profile, which he didn't in general have. And because there has been a series of tea parties where the security police have been very heavy. So it seemed to me at first that it must have come from somewhere, that someone there who was frustrated by the release of detainees after the hunger strike. But it just seems incredible that from that sort of level of frustration someone can decide to go and kill somebody.
I think there must be a similarity in the psychological makeups of the torturer and the assassin. And I really come to the conclusion that people who can do these things have a war psychosis. They believe that they are at war, they are conducting some kind of holy war, if you like.
I think there can be any number of motivations for assassinations. They can sometimes be clearly retributive. There's an intention to both punish a person and the particular peer group that person's associated with. It can be cautionary. It can be a warning to other people not to be involved in those sorts of activities. It can actually just be a straight expression of anger from elements who may be associated with state institutions, who feel frustrated by the anti-repression campaigns that were being run at that stage.
My impression is that this happened because the ideas that he held and the convictions that he portrayed, these were dangerous for the system. They in fact challenged the very root of an unjust and of an oppressive society. And David Webster, being the person that he was, exposed this step by step in his search for justice and for peace. And that is why, to my mind, it was the greatest danger, and he had to be removed.
Basically, at core, I believe that David would have been assassinated because he was being sufficiently efficacious as an individual and as an individual in organizations to be an irritant to the most repressive elements of the state.
Certainly his exposure of Renamo must have made an impact.
My actual belief is that David hadn't uncovered any startling and clear-cut proof about continued support for Renamo. But it is very feasible that because there is this strong evidence now, after David's death, that support for Renamo continues to go into Mozambique from northern Natal, that people in some of the hit squads that operate believed that David did know more than he actually knew, were under the misconception that David was coming very close to uncovering a secret Renamo network in that area.
His consistent publication also of these violations to the outside world, the document which he supplied, to the United Nations, all these increasingly raised the fears on the part of those who wanted to kill him, that he was becoming a very serious danger, and that eventually, therefore, all that exposure would lead to a disaster as far as the security forces were concerned.
My feeling was that it was probably a combination of all three factors: David's sympathy for the ANC, the prominent role that he played in the end conscription campaign, and the fact that he may well have been in a position to uncover information about Renamo in northern Natal.
I think David's death is a crucial focal point, especially as far as the South African and the internationalist community is concerned, about the effect of such an action on not only an individual, but also on a group of people. And it exposes and, it brings very clearly to light the total unacceptability of these kinds of methods in order to solve problems of differences of political beliefs and outlooks. And if David's death, however sad and regrettable, if David's death, was in a certain sense, therefore, I wouldn't say necessary, but if David's death exposed that, then I can only say that through his death, he's brought a message, of life and hope to our country and to Southern Africa.
Today, the detainees' tea parties that Webster helped initiate celebrate a new time in South Africa's history. The promise of freedom is in the air, despite the enormous problems that yet beset us. This tea party in Soweto was to welcome back the soldiers of Mkhonto Wesizwe who had been released from South Africa's prisons, and to dedicate them to serving the cause of the communities from which they had fled to fight a war in the name of liberation.
we both believed in a future South Africa that would be non-racial and democratic. But we also knew that although we wanted it to come peacefully, we wanted it to come without violence, but both of us knew that it would not come without violence. That was something that David always recognized, and I did too. That we felt there was no way to avoid it because we were up against such a violent foe, such a violent enemy. But we believed in the future, believed tremendously in the future of South Africa, and I would say I hope I live to see it. I know you will. That's what I said. I've forgotten that.
Do you know who David Webster was?
Yebo ngiyamazi. I know who was David Webster. He was elected Wits University.
Oh yeah, sure, I can figure out David Webster probably was a guy from God.
He was an activist, as you know very well. These whites, they did assassinate him or something like that, because they don't want us blacks to get, to get rights whatsoever, and our own rights in our own fucking country, man.
That's a different story. I'm not a politician. But who rules the country, who takes over the country is the materials. I'm happy with my family. That's more important to me.
It's only the hit squad used to kill all the leader, whites and blacks. The people who like to try to get this country in the right position.
And don't think just because you are white man we love you. No, we don't. We must rule you. You mustn't rule us in our fucking country. Get that? Yeah. We can't work for you people, man. You must work for us. This is our fucking country. What?
He had a very non-confrontational style. I think that this was evident in the way the funeral came together and was organized, that the people who wouldn't normally work together were able and willing and found themselves easily working together in a sort of spirit that was something that David embodied.
He was a very, peaceful man, even if he was fighting, but he was fighting in a very diplomatic way and not in a very violent way,
There were aspects of him that hadn't even come, that hadn't even been communicated yet, because he was just in the prime of his life. And that's all I could say. It was a very, very, very sad thing to happen. I feel a personal loss, and I was just one of many people who loved him. I don't know anybody who didn't, in fact.
That day, I didn't believe that man is killed. No, I thought perhaps, well, if it was myself too killed was all right, because there is no father will help us again with this music. Because everybody, it's only him that was trying to help us, to give us the courage to say, now, all right, go on, this is good.
I think there's grief with everyone. I don't think anyone who's close to David, I don't think that grief will ever go away. For me, he did represent a lot of what it can be fine in being a South African. And he opened up ideas for me of what it meant to be a South African in a broad way. But it was also just on his personal integrity. And I think all of us, there's just going to be a part where that grief is there, and it will never go,
How do you feel about South Africa now?
Optimistic and hopeful, in spite of this. One always did feel optimistic and hopeful, otherwise you would never have been involved in trying to work for anything.
Where's our gold right now? They open the mines, they take the gold. Where's the gold right now? Where's everything? We are suffering. We working for you.
Okay.